In this video we're going to repair this. This is of course the print head out of the 9120A printer. So this is a spark erosion printer. It's quite an interesting device, but what happens here is you have this print head. So this end, you've got these gold contacts on the bottom. This is clamped onto a PCB, makes contact with some traces on the PCB. You've then got this flexible cable that connects to the moving print head, and then the print head itself runs along the conductive paper and causes the image to be created. What's happened with this is firstly there's a lot of corrosion in the cable itself. You probably can't see it, but there are many breaks. It's what was copper has turned almost completely green, and it started breaking up, started delaminating and separating. So this is really some copper conductors with a piece of plastic glued to each side. But where the real problem lies is at the far end, at the print end. This end is actually tungsten. So it's very thin flat strips of tungsten. There are 7 of them, very closely spaced. They're about 0.3 millimeters apart, and that's clamped into this carrier. So this is what's used to control the position of the print head, and it's joined to the copper. They can't use tungsten all the way down, of course. One, it's expensive, but also it's very brittle, so if you tried running the tungsten all the way down, it would just break after a few cycles. So at about this point it joins to the copper conductors, but as you can probably see, it's delaminated. So there's a gap here, the plastics come apart, it gets moisture in there, you get corrosion between the copper and the tungsten, and then the conduction paths break down and it stops printing. So we need to repair this. Now I have shown very briefly a repair of the first of these 2 units. I've got 2 of these printers, the first one I've repaired. But I'm going to show in quite a lot of detail how I go about repairing this print head, in case you've got something similar or one of these that you need to repair yourself. Now the actual parts you'll need are of course a replacement cable. So I will be putting these onto my website. However, this is quite a tricky repair to effect, so if you want to buy one of these and give it a go, don't come running to me if it turns out you don't have the skills to complete this successfully. Watch through this entire video if you do intend to attempt this, but I won't be able to replace the cable if you damage it. Also be aware you kind of get one shot at this. If you're not careful and you damage the tungsten print head, then there's no real way to repair that. So you'll need a replacement cable. You will need some special conductive tape. So this is double-sided sticky tape, but it has it's a bit like zebra strip on an LCD. It has conductive paths running kind of vertically through the tape, but unlike a zebra strip, they are small dots. There's thousands and thousands of small paths, but they're not running strips either way. They're small isolated dots, and so in theory you don't get any kind of shorting of adjacent items. The dots are very small and they're much smaller than the spacing of the conductors. This is quite expensive, but if you do buy one of these off me, I will supply a piece of this tape. The tools you'll need are a very sharp knife, a good pair of tweezers, and an Allen key. Now, I'm not really sure what size the Allen key is. It appears to be about 28 thou. I didn't have one that small. I can't find one the right size anywhere, so I ground this one to suit. I'm not sure exactly what size it's supposed to be. This does fit, and it measures about 0.3 millimeters across the flats. So you'll have to find an Allen key that's the right size, and it's used to loosen the clamp screw in the head. You can pull, there's a wedge in here, you can pull that out, but you will need to adjust this, so you need an Allen key that's going to fit. And ideally some calipers. So the first thing we'll do is have a closer look at the existing cable. So there are A few steps in this. The first is to obviously get the cable out of the plastic clamp, and then we need to remove the print end from the plastic carrier. Before we do that, we'll have a look under the microscope. I won't video anything under the microscope. My camera on my microscope is very poor, so I'll take some still close-up shots, but I won't be able to actually video what I'm doing under the microscope. So we'll have a look at this first. So we'll look at this end, and as you can see, there's a lot of corrosion and dirt and debris and muck on there, and so we will need to clean that at some point. Now, before I take this apart, I want to measure the stick out of the print part of the tungsten. We will need to probably adjust this anyway, but just as a starting point, so I want to measure the distance that the tungsten is actually protruding from the end of the carrier. Don't know how well this is going to come across, but that's about 2.7 millimeters, so I'll make a note of that. So what I'll probably do is start off by extending the replacement out by 3 millimeters, and then we can adjust it as we go. So we'll begin this by removing the old cable from the plastic carrier. So this is the previous cable, so this is the one I repaired before. This is what's left. You can see I've cut the end off, and we'll do the same thing here. So this part of the cable would previously have been kind of pressed up against the end of the tungsten, and you can see it's all green and corroded, which is why it wasn't working. But also notice that the part I've cut off extends well past that, so I wanted plenty of overlap, and so that's where I cut it off. So we'll come back to that later, but the first thing is to get this end out of the carrier. Now, when the new cable's put back in, it does need to be folded. Now, the important thing here is if you fold it too sharply and press too hard, you could fracture the copper conductors. Also, only fold it once, so when you're reassembling this, you get one chance to fold the cable. If you mess it up, then you'll probably destroy the cable. So to get this out, what we have to do is unlatch it. So there are two latches here. Pop those back. These normally aren't too brittle, but don't go any further than you need to when you bend them, otherwise you could snap the little tabs off. This is quite a soft plastic, so hopefully it won't fail. So I'll get these opened up, and then we can get the cable taken out. So I've unlatched the two tabs. This section will now lever back, so don't go too far, don't keep waving it about, because otherwise it could snap off at the hinge. Just go back as far as you need to. This will then just lift out. There's nothing, it's not glued in or anything, it will just lift straight out. You can pull this through, the little slot it runs in, and then that end will come out. Next step is to get this end out, and this is where you need to start being very careful. The tungsten is very brittle. If you bend it too many times, it will just snap off, and that's kind of game over then. There's no way to repair that. So the Allen key goes in, undo the little screw. Okay, and once you've turned it about 2 turns, this wedge should just come out. Then we need to very carefully remove and withdraw the tungsten. What I'm going to do here before I start is just very carefully scrape away some of the lumps to make sure that we don't pull the tungsten out. It's not very well bonded into the plastic, so it will pull out fairly easily. So I'm not putting any pressure on here, I'm just getting rid of any loose bits of corrosion. And now it should be possible to very carefully withdraw this from the carrier. Remember, it's been in there for a long time, so I'm being very careful with this. Okay, and we now have the cable removed. And you can see the tungsten, hopefully you can see the tungsten part at the end, and you can see where it joins. Turn it up, you can see it more clearly. You can see it widens out, so the tungsten starts off very close together, it widens out, and then it terminates about here. So that's the end of the tungsten. What we have to do is cut through, because we need to be able to expose the tungsten, so we have to cut through the plastic on one side. You need to be extremely careful here. Tungsten's very brittle, and if we cut down too deep and we even just scratch the tungsten, it will snap at that point. So when we cut through, we don't want to cut all the way through the plastic. We want to cut just far enough so the plastic will fail when we try and bend it up. As I say, if you go too far, then the knife nicks the tungsten and the tungsten will fail at that point. So this is one of the most critical parts of the repair, as to how to get this apart. Now of course you need to expose the correct side. So if we look at the original, you can work this out by looking at the parts, but look at the original, you've got the conductive part, the gold plating. If we flatten the cable out and put that down, so that's now facing downwards, you can see we're looking at the back of the cable. So we need to have the gold plating facing upwards, and when we get to the other end of the cable, this is how we need to cut it off. So we need to cut the underside. If you mount this the same way, let's make sure I got the right way up. So that's this way up. So we need to cut like this, so we have to cut the underside close up to the end of the tungsten. Okay, so I'll make sure these are both the same way up. It's difficult to do this, I can't see much past the camera, but do what I can. So we'll put both cables the same way up. So the gold is down on both cables, and if we make sure we don't twist them and pull this through, notice they're also bent in the same direction, which is a good indication we've got this right. So what we have to do is cut the top surface up close to the tungsten, so that's pretty much at this point. So where you can see it widen, so here, just short of that, so I want to cut it about here. And then on the other side, it's not that critical, but further back to give us some overlap. So I'll try and show this more clearly on the still shot under the microscope, but I'm going to make the first cut up here. I'm not going to cut all the way through the plastic, just deep enough so I can kind of delaminate it and peel it off, and then I'm going to flip the cable over and cut further back through the plastic. Okay, I've marked this where I intend to cut it, and although you probably can't see this on the camera, if you look through the plastic very carefully, you can see that the side I've marked is the side where the copper is sitting on top of the tungsten, so the tungsten is actually underneath the copper, because obviously you need to put the new cable on top of the tungsten. And then on the other side, further down, I want to cut it about here. It's not that critical where we cut this bit, just allow plenty of overlap. So I'll get under the microscope with this and show you the two cuts, and hopefully you can see how I managed to cut this off. So as you can see, this is where I cut the first part. So this is on the top side, where this is the side the copper sitting on top of the tungsten, and this is the other side where I cut it further back to allow plenty of overlap. So that is the first part of the operation completed. I'd cut through very carefully on the tungsten side, so what we've got now is the tungsten largely exposed. There's still kind of dirt and grime on here we need to clean off, and then on the obviously the top plastic then peeled up, and the way I go about cutting this off is just cut about halfway through the plastic, hold the two pieces together. If you just try and peel the plastic up, it will just peel the whole thing off, and then the entire head will just fall to pieces. So you cut about halfway through the plastic, hold the plastic down at the end, towards the end of the cut, and then just work the plastic back and forth a few times and it should separate. And then all you do is on the other side, a bit of plastic on the other side, you just cut it off. Leave about sort of 30mm or so. It's not critical. You don't want too much. I'll probably trim this off a little bit, but it's not that important. It's just to give some overlap to support the cable. And also the next step is to attach the tungsten to our new cable, and obviously that goes on with the gold contacts facing down. In fact, on this cable, if you look at the shots under the microscope, you can see what's left of the gold contacts that were on the original cable. Obviously they corroded, and that's one of the problems. But this now needs to get bonded down onto the cable. Before we can do that, we need to clean up the remnants of the tungsten. So again, you probably want me to see this, but there's a lot of dirt and grime on the tungsten. So around this point I want to clean this up. I'm going to use some 3000 grit abrasive paper just to very carefully clean this. I'll do it under the microscope. I won't show that, but it's just cleaning it however you can. I recommend you do not use something like isopropyl alcohol, because that will tend to dissolve the adhesive that's holding all this together, and then the whole thing will fall to pieces, and obviously that's going to make your life very difficult. I'm going to clean the very tips with isopropyl alcohol, but making sure I don't get it into the plastic. But as far as the tungsten area down here is concerned, you don't want to use isopropyl alcohol here, because you don't want the bond between the plastic and the tungsten to fail at this point. And what I was saying about not nicking the tungsten, like I said, that's this point. If you go too deep and nick the tungsten, these portions will just snap off, which is why you want to cut halfway through the plastic and then work it back and forth until the plastic separates. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is finish cleaning this up. We'll have a quick look at it under the microscope when I'm done, and we'll then go on to the method I use to attach the new cable. Okay, I finished preparing the print head. It's cleaned up quite well. As you can see, there was an awful lot of dirt and gunk on this. This is the tip before and after cleaning, and this is the overlap section before and after cleaning. So you can see that it's cleaned up reasonably well, and the next step is to attach the new cable. So it does of course attach to the exposed section, and we need to make sure that the gold contacts are facing down on the new cable and the tungsten is facing up on the original print head. Once you apply the tape, you can't see through it anymore, so you need to align it beforehand. So what I do is I tape the print head down towards the end. Obviously don't tape it down here, otherwise you won't be able to put the new cable on, and then I tape the new cable down and make sure it's properly aligned. So tape it in at least 2 points, but not too close to the end. What you can then do is peel this section back up, apply the tape, fold this back down, and it should bond into the correct position. You need to get it fairly accurately aligned, 0.05mm or better. If it's not aligned correctly, even if it's overlapping a little bit, you might not get enough overlap for the conductive tape to do its job. It needs a reasonable surface area in order to conduct enough current for this to work. So you need to get fairly accurate. I'll try and show this on the microscope, but I'm not quite sure how clear it will be, but hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on. If it all went well, you should end up with the head bonded to the new cable. So the next step is to get this refitted to the plastic carrier. So this goes in here relatively easily. It's not particularly critical, but you do need to make sure it's aligned reasonably well. So the gold plating has to go down. So you start off by really pushing the end of the cable, this is the old one of course, through the carrier at this point. it loops directly upwards like this, and then you arrange it so that the gold section is at the bottom, and then you need to put a bend in the cable to feed it out at right angles. Don't put the bend in too severely, and also you need to make sure this aligns with this gap. So it's kind of hard to explain how you go about doing this. You just need to kind of offer it up. Don't put the final bend into the cable till you're certain it's lined up, and also that the gold contacts are in the right position, and then once it's all lined up, you can put the bend in. You only get one chance to make the bend. If you do it wrong and you try rebending the flat cable, you'll almost certainly damage it. And then once you're certain it's all lined up, you can pop this shut, and it will then be ready to have the head carrier refitted. So we'll do that next. Again, I can't really do this on camera because I can't really see it well enough through the camera to do this. What I'm going to do is feed the new cable through, exactly the same procedure we've just followed, and then I'll bend the cable, put the 45 or 90 degree bend in it, depends on how you look at it, to get the cable coming out sideways. Okay, I fed the cable through the slot, brought it around and up this side, made a 90 degree bend so that the cable's passing through this slot. Make sure you don't crimp it or that will damage it. And I haven't really put a strong bend in it, I haven't compressed that. I'll let the plastic housing do that just enough. And before we snap this shut, what we have to do is pull this loose end upwards. And what we're trying to do is tighten this section here. So we'll pull that up, and as I'm pulling it up you'll see that tightens, and then I can snap the plastic housing shut. So that's now snapped shut, and the cable is indeed properly routed out of this. The gold contacts are in the correct location, so that is the way it's meant to go on. And then the final step is to pass this back through the head. Before I do that, I'm going to clean this. This is all covered in dirt and grime, so I'll clean this off first, and then all we do is we pass this through this head, put the wedge back in, tighten the grub screw, and it's ready to refit. So I'll get this cleaned up and we'll finish the reassembly. So that's the carrier cleaned up. Make sure you get this the right way round, so this will fit onto the board with the cable going out away from you. Loop it all around, making sure there's no twist, and then this fits this way up, so the cable's going to end up pointing across towards the right. So this goes through this slot. It's quite a narrow slot at the end, but make sure it goes through cleanly. If you recall, I was going to extend this through by 3mm. The wedge goes back in, so push that all the way in, and there's a tab on the end of the wedge that when you tighten the grub screw it clamps the cable down. So what I'm going to do now is make sure there's 3mm of the tungsten protruding, and then I'm going to snug down the Allen key. It doesn't need to be horrendously tight, but it needs to be tight enough to stop the cable pulling back through. So I'll get that done. Okay, I've reassembled the print head. I've extended the tungsten through a nominal 3mm. It varies in length, as you can see, so I've averaged that out, and I've got 3mm poking out. And this is now ready to refit to the machine. Now, if you are going to attempt this, I have to stress that if you buy a cable off me and you damage it, you'll have to buy a new one. What I suggest you do is, I can't really decide if this is easy or very difficult. I do a lot of this, so it's hard for me to judge. Hopefully this video is giving you an idea as to what's involved. What I strongly advise you do, probably the trickiest part of this, other than aligning the print head with the new cable, is figuring out how to fold this. And so what I suggest, if you do attempt this, is use the old cable before you try putting the new one in, and fit it and remove it a few times so you kind of can figure out exactly how this is all supposed to be arranged. Look at the original before you take it off. It's kind of easy to put on there once you've done it a couple of times, but as I say, you only get one chance, so the first time you do it, you need to make sure you do it correctly. What I did, because I didn't have an original when I did it the first time, is I made up a paper blank that was exactly the same shape and size as the original cable. It doesn't need to be the entire length, but just enough for you to be able to figure out how it all folds and goes in there. As I say, you can't keep folding and unfolding the copper because it will fracture. Okay, so this is ready to go back into the machine. So in the next video, what we'll do is get this refitted to the printer and see if it actually functions. Of course, I'm not going to leave you waiting till the next video. We'll give it a quick test now. We'll more than likely need the heads kind of abrading down so they're even, as I did on the first one, but we'll see if it does anything at all. Got the head refitted, and before I power this up, I want to just make sure that the mechanism is properly driving the head so we don't damage the fingers on the print head. So what I'm going to do is zoom you in. I'll lift this top cover up out of the way so we can see the print head. I'll zoom you in and we can observe the print head while I go through a manual cycle. So what I'm going to do is manually cycle the printer. The head should move across. Now as it starts to move, it should rotate. I don't know if you can see the fingers very clearly, but they're poking out, you're kind of looking edge onto them, but they should rotate down onto the paper as it starts to move across. It should get to the end, and before it reverses direction they must lift up. If they don't, then when they start moving back they'll dig in and it will tear them off. So we need to make absolutely certain that this is all working properly before we try and run it at speed. Now what I'm going to do is start turning it, and I'll engage the clutch as I do that, and it should start a print cycle. So we'll get this underway, move the clutch across. So we've now started the print cycle. I'll keep turning. You can see the head is moving down. The fingers are, if not in contact, at least very close to the paper. You should see pushing the paper up as it moves across. This is the portion where it would normally be printing. It will get to the end and it should lift the fingers back up off the paper, which it is doing. Start moving back, and at the same time it should feed the paper out. Which it is doing. So it looks like it's working at least at this speed. So I'll put the paper guide back on and we'll try powering up the calculator and see if the printer can actually do anything under power. Turn the calculator on. Let's wait for the display on the calculator to come to life. So that's now up and running, so I'll power up the printer. I'll select the X register and I'll try printing a single line by pressing the print key on the calculator. Try selecting the other two registers. Okay, so we've got a few characters, but only on the first pass. So I'll try pressing the list key. Okay, now you probably can't see it, but it is printing very lightly. There's hardly, I think there's hardly any contact between the print head and the paper. I think that's why it printed the first time, because the paper just happened to be bowed out a little bit, not being tight. So that's good. It just means that the printer head needs a bit more adjustment, but it does at least appear as if though the repair is partially successful. We'll have to see how well it does once it's printed a few times. Just going to have a quick look to see how much clearance we're getting. The print head still seems fine. I'm going to leave this off, and if it is just a contact thing, then we should see something appearing on the paper. Okay, I'll feed some paper out so you can see what's going on. So hope you can see that. Let's turn this off so you can hear me. Printing very clear. This is what's on the display of the printer. It's running the self-test program. Probably not coming out very clearly, and for some reason my camera can't pick up the text on this silver paper very clearly. But you can see that when I move the paper a bit closer to the print head, it's printing very nice and clearly. So in other words, our cable's working, we just need to feed a bit more print head out. But either way, it looks like it's printing reasonably well. It's printing much better than the other printer was. In fact, the text is incredibly clear. It's very bright. All the rows are present. So it looks like our repair to the print head has been successful. A few minor adjustments and this printer should be back up and running. So in the next video I'll get this adjusted. It looks like the print head doesn't even need a braiding back down, so it's level. It appears to be printing quite nice and evenly, so I'll probably leave it as it is for now and just adjust the height. So that's good. It means we're getting fairly close now to having this printer fully functional.